welcome to the Physical AI podcast series. I'm Leela Krishna. I'm focused on research in physical AI and embodied AI. Today, I'm fortunate to have here with me Professor Michael Yip. He's a prolific inventor, inducted into the National Academy of Inventors, and he is currently running the ARC Lab of UC San Diego as the Director of Autonomic Robotics and Control.
Yeah, very nice to be here with you.
Thank you, Professor. Can you briefly share us a background about yourself?
Sure. So in terms of my background, I've been in the robotics space for about 20 years now. When I went through university, I actually came from quite a few different diverse experiences and degrees, from mechanical engineering to electrical to bioengineering, and now more into the computer science domain. And so it's been very interesting to see kind of this shift and all of these different domains coming together to kind of move robotics forward. One of the other opportunities that I frequently get is to interact with different industries and different commercial partners. I've worked with folks ranging from Disney Imagineering and working on their animatronic figures to places like Amazon Robotics and working with them on their logistics and fulfillment centers. So, just seeing that progress in the past 10 to 20 years is it's been a very exciting time.
That's great. In fact, robotics combines all these dimensions, and it's good to see that there's so many dimensions involved with it and so many industries. I want to get to what I'm fascinated to see these days in YouTube, right? All these humanoids making all these tricky backflips and humanoids trying to fold towels and make coffee, right? So I want to bring up this conversation about, are humanoids really at a practical stage? Are they really here?
Yeah, I think humanoid robots, again, like the idea of humanoid robots has been around, right, for well over 60 to 80 years, right? So the initial vision of humanoid robots, you can see it in black and white film. And so the whole idea of it not only started from, this conceptual and visionary media, but also we saw it kind of come into practice at a demonstration scale with robots like the Honda Asimo, which was the early 2000s, where they had this space age looking robot, climbing stairs. And so I think, you look at what was done there and you look at what's done today, the functionality of locomotion of humanoid robots has progressed. And you mentioned things like backflips and really humanoids working with their hands and doing some things like folding towels or interacting in a kitchen. A lot of these videos, they are generated content. Mm-hmm. And that means that they are curated and finally, spliced and diced together. So it really shows what potentially could be capable, but we have to look at that with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. I think I want to double click on that in terms of these near perfect motions, right? And essentially, all these videos look like they're doing special feats, but is it possible and is it practical that one of these kitchen robots can make a coffee for us here, right? Yeah. Or can it actually really fold towels and maybe make a pizza for us?
So one of the things that is really interesting is the types of tasks that you just asked about. They all involve hands, right? And they all involve interacting with the world. And so we have to look at what humanoid robots can do kind of in two different ways. One is, how can they move around in their environment? And the other one is, how can they interact in the environment? So one of the reasons why locomotion and body movement in a space where you're not interacting with the environment has been easier to show for more performers in the robotic space is that it is about just like the robot knowing how to use its own actuators to deliver these dynamic motions, right? It doesn't really need to understand anything about the world. And so those kind of developments in locomotion and dynamic movement, those are real, right? Those are things that you can expect with enough training with whichever training technique you feel is you like the most, whether it's like imitation to reinforcement learning and things like that. Those are real, and there's a pretty well structured kind of pipeline to kind of learning new tasks there. However, when you start talking about interacting with the world, right, and doing things like cooking, breakfast, or to some degree folding laundry, maybe in a healthcare space, which is something I'm very passionate about, using humanoid robots to act as assistants in operating rooms, to nurse to help with nursing shortages and things like that, where you have to do physical interaction. That becomes much harder and
more precise.
And that's where, in practice, what is shown in video, when you try to replicate it, it very often just breaks down.
So I understood that locomotion and some of these general purpose tasks are relatively easy compared to the high dexterity tasks, like either cooking, or you went even further into hospital care, which needs to be extremely precise and sensitive to humans. So I still want to challenge the first part a little bit in terms of these robots that backflip, for example, or they're navigating a space. What happens? Are they perfect enough that if they slip and fall, or if they hurt someone, are they going to be able to react and recover from them?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because recovery under circumstances that are unseen, in previous examples, right, in which these locomotion policies are usually trained on, it's basically from a machine learning point of view, it's out of the distribution of what the robot or the AI has seen before. And it's in these situations, of course, where when you're out of distribution, one of the challenges with AI models is that it doesn't know that it's out of distribution, and therefore it starts hallucinating, the scenario. And so, there is quite a significant concern in terms of if you're putting these systems in environments where, if it fails, there is something negative that can happen. Of course, there's like the fact that the robot can hurt itself in some ways, right? Like in terms of it can mechanically damage itself. But maybe it can actually, end up falling into people or other things. Then you have a issue there, and that issue is not currently well addressed. And it really comes down to the core of how does the AI system not only learn to recover, which is slightly downstream, but to even recognize, right, that it is outside of its depth.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. And this is the easy side of the problem, which is the locomotion and planning.
And it's funny from a LLM point of view, right? Because if we take the latest in chatbots today, right? You can ask a chatbot anything, and it's always very, very sure of itself until you question it. And then
absolutely,
the question is like, sometimes it's sure of itself, sometimes it's not. But the point is that it doesn't actually know, and so I think that's actually a challenge that is facing not only the robotics community, but the global, like the more general AI community.
Yeah. So that only puts more pressure on the dexterity and the more precise tasks that we were talking about, which is the harder problem. So you went deeply into how many training examples in the policy. So is training with more data the solution?
I think if you look at it from just like, let's gather more data without thinking about the parameters of what that data needs to contain and what it maybe doesn't need to contain, I think that becomes the real kind of nuance here, because just gathering more data without intention is not going to generate useful data for you. And so I think we have to look at it from a useful data perspective to data that's not so useful, right?
Absolutely. We can see that the industry is looking at announcing numbers like training on 1,000 hours of data, 10,000, 40,000 hours. These numbers are becoming more and more glamorous, right? And it seems to be that these are on the number of activities, right? So I think if we take the locomotion or the kitchen tasks example, you could train it on a number of tasks, but you don't get to perfection on a single task, much less how do you react if the pizza is burning, right?
Yeah.
So I want to understand deeply about how do we go about collecting this data?
Yeah. So the way to go into collecting the data to learn tasks, I think you have to look at it from figuring out what is the domain of skill that you want to capture, and you want to try to tighten that domain enough so that when you do collect the data, the data is actually useful for training, right? There has been somewhat of debate right now in the robotic space, which is about, well, if I trained on a huge diversity of data of manipulating objects,
Exactly.
and we'll focus on manipulating objects because it is by far the harder, use case, right? So anything to do with hands and like interacting with the world. If I just diversify that data as much as possible, am I learning the skills of a generalistic skill of how do I interact with the world, or am I not? And I think you're going to get different responses from different people. But I think the reality, in my perspective, and having worked in the different domains of medical robotics, but also to like industrial automation using multiple robots, is that when it counts and when you really need to deploy something, people are seeking performance levels that are about skill refinement and a skill set that is highly tuned, right, to perform. And if we look at kind of the divide between broad data collection and the performance you're getting there, which is between, honestly, many of these cases are 40 to sometimes 80%. They'll kind of tease that they can get 80%
That's
performance.
a broad range.
Yeah, that's a huge range, number one. But, if we take even a not critical task of washing dishes and you can, even if you get to like 95% of the time that you can properly pick up plates and scrub them, if you're dropping plates 5% of the time, in your kitchen over the course of a week, you're out of plates, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think, when we look at it from a data collection perspective, we really need to say that the boundaries, let's say for laundry folding or dishwashing, we have to set those boundaries very carefully. So what are the objects we're interacting with? How much do they differ from one another? What is a robot we're dealing with? How much does that differ from one another? How are we collecting the data? Because how you collect the data, like what cameras are you using? What is the latency between the camera feed and the robot, sensors? There's a lot of things that come into the quality of the data. And in reality, when we talk about, let's just collect more data, the experts will come in and be like, yeah, the challenge is, what is the data and how do we curate that data very carefully?
That's fantastic, actually. I think that's really enlightening for me to understand because I see these data sets of 100K tasks and 10,000 activities, 50,000 activities all over, right? And they seem to have a few examples of a simple task. What you paraphrased for us is very, very useful in saying that you have to define the domain boundaries and make a controlled collection.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
And I will say, like, we were part of some of these trials. So my research lab was part of the RT1 and RTX, which is just a collection of 20 plus institutions and both academic and private companies, collecting hundreds of thousands of trajectories of robots across 20 different embodiments across kitchens and bedrooms and things like that. And so even in those, environments, from our personal experience, we've been able to see that there is interest and value to maybe some learning that's happening on general behavior of interaction with objects. But then if you're looking at it from the flip side of, I want this task to be done to an efficiency and a productivity that it makes sense for a robot to do it. Now we're talking about caring a lot about not these large, like expansive and unconstrained data collections, but to something that's a lot more focused.
Fantastic. I think so. It's a lot of planning for us to collect data for a specific activity. You've also mentioned about collecting data for various environments. So everybody is talking about this home robot, but you mentioned industrial robotics settings and also medical robotics settings. So you think there is a difference in how we plan these fundamentally, or is it just additional amount of data, whether it is sensors, etc., that we need for it?
Well, certainly you need to look at these in very different contexts, and also you need perhaps very different, multimodality sensing and perhaps actuation.
It seems like the industrial side would require a more reliability, in the sense that the task could be more repeatable, whereas there is more variety in the home area, whether it is in the kitchen or folding towels and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting from, again, if you look at the certain tasks involved in the industrial setting, right, and you're trying to hit like the significant digit on the last decimal, of 100%, right?
Yep.
To make it actually worthwhile to automate. In those settings, the data collection that you're looking at is really kind of different, right, than the healthcare or home settings. So in those settings, you're trying to actually tease out what are the failure modes, right? What is the long tail, in statistics talk, right? What is the long tail events that happen so infrequently, but when they happen, you want to be able to catch that. And now you have because you have a data imbalance problem, right?
Yep.
From a machine learning perspective, you can learn 99% of the data, but once the last 1%, those failure modes, they happen infrequently enough that as you scale more and more data collection, if you're just scaling across entire kind of domain of the task, you only get those examples that will help train like 1% of the time.
Absolutely.
Right? And so
the
that's,
focus is on repeatability and the confidence interval of getting it very precise in an industrial setting.
Yeah. And now if you look at from home environment and then a healthcare setting, you do want that too. But I will say from my perspective, I think the diversity of tasks are so great that we're never going to get to a point where we can just constantly be training on, hey, like the 1%, let's drop a plate and see what happens, right? Like that's not realistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we need to kind of understand it from more guardrail perspective of saying, all right, this AI agent should know this is the limits of my capability, and can I make sure that once I exceed those limits that, I'm not doing further damage.
Absolutely. So it seems like scaling these is pretty hard in order for us to be able to get the domain definition. And then we would try to scale it and get repeatable. So are there any metrics in terms of how we measure the data collection activity specifically, right? And I want to understand from you, when would you say this is a qualified data set?
So from a data quality perspective, the way that we usually look at it in my research lab is that we look at what is the exact task that needs to be performed, what is the key thing that is important to that task. So it's like dishwashing as an example. So the key metric for dishwashing, right, is that it sounds a little bit trivial, but the dish is clean.
Exactly. Yep.
To be fair, like it doesn't actually say anything about scrubbing, right? It doesn't really say anything about how the robot executes this. The key metric is just that it is clean at the end of the day. These are important from if you think about what is actually important to label. But then there's these soft, metrics that we can look at that are talking about things like how smooth is the motion, right? Like how much effort, energy is expended to do these motions. These are very useful to guide the robot to learn good behaviors and effective behaviors. But in many ways, they could complement the task, the absolute like requirement of the task, or they actually could be in opposition to it, right? And if we look at how some people are looking at training robots, which is looking at how humans do it, right, and trying to make the robot mimic the human, we humans have a lot of other variables that are that influence how we behave, and a robot doesn't have that.
We don't think that much about cleaning dishes or making something. We automatically and naturally improvise.
Right, and like we care about our ergonomics. We don't want to strain ourselves, and so our actions, how fast we move, what motions we carry out, how our joints are limiting our behavior. Those don't translate. Those are not necessary, right, to the task. And so while these soft metrics of smoothness and so on and so forth are interesting and maybe worthwhile to characterize and kind of pin out, it's not a requirement. And I think the way to look at it is that it's just a warm start to an AI algorithm to say, okay, this is one way to do it. This is how humans do it. But is there better ways? Can we train this to become better, faster, more performant?
So it seems like there is an efficacy versus efficiency. Is the dish clean? Is the overall efficacy of the task? And the efficiency is about how much effort and what's the minimal effort you've used and what's the kind of motion and other things.
Yeah, so, and then the difference between who's collecting the data that the robot's training on and how well that data matches what the full capabilities of the robot are. So
it seems, and I've noticed something about observing this activity itself. So it seems like there's a verifiability component because the robot cannot tell us if the dish is clean. So we need another system or an augmented verifiability aspect to these activities, right? So the data collection itself does not tell us anything. We would have to understand how to verify the data. Can you briefly comment on how would you verify these tasks?
Yeah, so I mean, the lowest hanging fruit is to hope that somebody has created, an AI model, probably a visual,
a computer vision
model, whether it's a VLM or something like that, that will be able to correctly label all of your cases, right? So number one, you hope that it's like 100%, automatically verifiable. But number two, the reality is that that model had to be learned.
Again, perfected
and learned from somebody labeling it, right? So at the end of the day, it's going to be labeled by either through human engineering or human labeling. And when I say human engineering, I mean like engineering features, like so feature engineering, that's, that this is exactly what's happening. And if I can see that feature, then that means that this is verified, right? And so whether you have something that you can piggyback off of or not, it ends up being that data does need labeling from humans.
Yeah, and it seems like there is a need for benchmarking it in terms of what is the level at which the data is collected. Is this good enough? Is this the best possible? Or is there room for improvement in this?
Well, yes, and I think that there's kind of like both what I mentioned in that the task completion, right? That is easy to label from a human side. And is the task completion good enough, right? That I think is interesting from, that's something that we can label. Can it get better? Now that's kind of interesting because as humans, we do not really have a sense of the embodiment capabilities or limitations of a robot. And so we might think that there's a better way to do things, but the robot often isn't capable, or vice versa, right? We think that the robots kind of achieve the best performance it can, and yet the robot finds a new way. And reinforcement learning, of course, as a technique where the robot self-learns, has been really interesting in this perspective of finding out completely different ways by itself to complete a task that humans never, thought about. One early example, of this in reinforcement learning is when it was when it was applied to playing video games, right? And so many kind of fun stories about how they thought, finishing a race, in a computer game, the RL agent was going to learn to finish a race, but in fact, the RL agent decided it would never finish the race, and it would just collect, extra points that it could collect, as part of, the race conditions.
I see.
And that was a way that it would effectively win, right? And so it's this kind of, there's a interesting potential mismatch between what we can envision as humans and what the robot could self-learn.
I see. So you're saying that there is also a verifiability system need, and the evaluation of the verifiability itself will tell us, especially in the context of reinforcement learning, if the robot figures out alternate motives or alternatives to actually change the policy structure in some way and achieve. So we need a better way to evaluate this.
Right.
That's very interesting. And I think building this system itself, it seems like, as I contemplate what does it take for us to be able to train a humanoid, it seems like there's enough data to be collected. There is a need for verification, benchmarking. There's a need for an RL world where you constantly iterate over it. All of this needs to be a consolidated system that has to work. I want to ask about all the efforts that are going in the world models these days. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about publishing world models, understanding it. Several companies have done this by training with real world video. So what do you think is the objective there in helping world models understand real video?
The world modeling aspect of robot autonomy and AI, I think, is really interesting because it is kind of the foundation of what the robot believes it can do in interacting with the world, right? That model should be able to express the possibilities of how the world evolves through the interaction of the robot. The way that the world models work, you mentioned things like video generation as a backbone for most of the world models.
Exactly.
Video generation, is obviously about 2D, visually.
It's like me watching how to ride a bike.
Right. I think that's a great example because you riding a bike doesn't at all tell you or teach you immediately how to ride a bike, right? I think that's a great example, and it was going to kind of get to this point, which is that in vision generation, you can make things look really good, but it doesn't mean that there's an understanding of how the world works, or there's also a pathway where you break the rules just so that it looks good. And a great example has been around for decades is computer graphics, right? If you look at how computer animation worked, especially in the 90s and 2000s, how they were constructing scenes to look very visually, compelling from Jurassic Park,
like
and
the
the
CGI,
dinosaurs and all that, right? If you look behind the hood, and they're very happy to because it's kind of amusing. Behind the hood, like, oh, this makes no physical sense, right? And so we can do video generation without understanding world physics, basically.
I see.
And of course, there is many groups that are trying to do physics informed world modeling, but we have to be careful just to separate out huge advances in video generation that have maybe no inherent understanding of physical interaction with the world, and those that are attempting to do so, which tend to, progress a bit slower, but are more foundationally grounded. And that area is where robotics, in my opinion, is going to be able to leverage more of that world understanding.
It's interesting. So I see this with many companies that they're building a world model and then they're building sort of the dojo, so to speak, in order to combine this into reinforcement learning. So it seems like this process is still a long way to go. right? We started off saying there's advanced robots that are actually doing backflips.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we're getting more and more real with your discussion that there's still a long way to go. Yeah. So my question is, how far do you think we are in terms of a kitchen robot serving us our favorite latte?
Yeah. So the kitchen robot serving a favorite latte, if we were just doing that, yeah, I think we could do it today, right?
I see.
Because you would set up your robot and
do just that.
to do just that. And you would make sure that it only interacts with your favorite coffee maker, right?
I see.
In some ways, there are a couple of companies out there that are doing this, right? And you can see these robot arms and pods that are kind of interacting with espresso machines and things like that. So yes, I think that if we look at how close we are for mobile robots or humanoid robots to be interacting in the kitchen, we need to kind of break it down into what tasks are the highest priority. I'm guessing coffee is high priority for some people. And it is for me, but we have to figure out what is the highest priority task and how many of those tasks or what collection of similar tasks that involve the same skill set, how many of those need to be accomplished before we believe that there is commercial value and objective value to the person to have the humanoid robot in their kitchen. And so if we take a look at food preparation in a home setting, I think we're a long ways away because nobody wants to eat the same food.
Absolutely.
In a restaurant setting where you have fixed set of menus and you're going to be executing, especially for a small menu list, you're going to be executing those frequently. I don't see it being very far away as long as the robot is focused on just the cooking part. And all the little things that happen that involve
safety standards and food standards.
Yeah. And pieces of food kind of you have to pick up and stuff like that to sorting between different dishes and things like all of that. It just complicates and the whole development cycle of the focus task of I need to make a sauce or something like that. And so I think if we can get human support to kind of set the environment up for the robot to just focus on that task and the consistency between what it's interacting with is well defined, then I think we're going to see it happen in a few years.
Yeah, so that's very fascinating, Dr. Yip. So from world model understanding, training videos to make sure the robot understands how to interact with the world, to the RL world dozos, it seems like there's a lot of steps involved in order to get to my favorite pizza recipe or essentially a robot that can take care of elderly in a medical environment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the more we look at learning the key elements of robot agency, which is understanding the world, which is the world models, to perceiving the world and aligning it with its understanding, so that's perception, to decision-making and planning, and that means things that involve semantic understanding of what has to happen, to kind of the fine-level manipulations to actually carry out the task. Each of those are individual pillars of robot intelligence that have data needs that are different from each other, that have inputs and outputs that are different and have a lot of nuance in how do you train it and how do you execute and deploy them in a way that is going to actually deliver its performance. And so looking at those individually, I think that there's a lot of depth and a lot of opportunities as well for future development.
Thank you so much for tuning in. That's an elaborate discussion on physical AI and the challenges that we have. Dr. Yip is technical advisor at Centific Global Solutions. Subscribe to this link for more deeper discussions in these areas.